The Alpha didn't find me, because I was an Omega. He found me because I refused to beg. The quarantine zone has a smell you never forget. Hot metal, wet ash, old, blood soaked into concrete like a stain the city gave up scrubbing. Even the wind feels sharp here, like it's learned to bite. I crouched beside the busted generator wedged between two burned-out storefronts, my headlamp throwing a thin cone of light over wires I'd already patched twice this week. The casing was warm under my palm. Not from working, nothing in this zone worked the way it was supposed to, but from the fire that had kissed it months ago, and left it half-melted, half-snarling. Survival was routine now. Wake. Check the doors. Count the bullets. Fix something that shouldn't be fixable. Eat something that shouldn't be edible. Sleep with one ear open and both hands closed. Hope was for people who lived where the streetlights stayed on. I twisted a stripped screw with the edge of my knife, teeth clenched, shoulders tight. The metal squealed. Somewhere in the distance, glass crunched under someone else's boot. Or a paw. It was hard to tell in this neighborhood. Everything moved like it had learned to keep secrets. The emergency lamps overhead, those sad little red eyes strung along the cracked sky bridge, flickered like they were embarrassed to still be alive. They painted the street in pulses, red, darker red, almost black. I listened anyway. I always listened. Because I wasn't waiting for rescue. I'd done that once. The memory hit like cold water, bright daylight, the heavy stench of fear and sweat packed into our old den, and the sound of our Alpha's voice, firm, trembling at the edges. "Rian," he said, not looking at me. "You're quick. You know the tunnels. You can hold them off while we move the others." Hold them off. That's what they called it when they needed someone to die in a direction that bought them time. I'd stared at the line of my pack filing out, betas, pups, even the old Omega who'd taught me to wrap wounds with clean cloth. No one met my eyes. Not one. They moved like a school of fish pretending the shark wasn't real.
If this story caught you, subscribe. More are waiting.
My Alpha paused at the threshold, finally turning back. His jaw worked like he wanted to say something human. Something true. Instead he said, "You'll be rewarded. I promise." I didn't beg then either. I just nodded. Because there are humiliations worse than pleading. Like believing them. The generator coughed, dragging me back. I connected the last wire, bracing for the spark. The air felt thick. Charged. Wrong. My Omega instincts prickled under my skin, not in heat, not in fear. In awareness. Something was near. I went still. The city held its breath with me. No footsteps. No growl. No taunting laughter from rebels. Just a silence so heavy it pressed against my ribs. Then I smelled him. Clean soap over gun oil. Cold night air. And that unmistakable Alpha signature that didn't just enter a space. It claimed gravity. I didn't turn fast. Fast looked afraid. I set my knife down like I had all the time in the world, wiped my hands on my jeans, and finally stood. He was a shadow at the edge of my headlamp's reach, tall enough that the broken streetlight behind him framed his shoulders like a warning. The red emergency lamps blinked over his face in slow pulses, carving him into angles, cheekbone, jaw, the calm line of his mouth. His eyes stayed steady, not glowing like the rebels like to show off. Just watching, measuring. Mark Hale, the city pack's Alpha, the one people whispered about like saying his name could summon him. I could have run. I knew the alleys, the roof ladders, the drains. I'd survive. But something stubborn in me lifted its chin. "You're lost," I called, voice too casual for the way my heartbeat had started punching at my throat. His gaze flicked to the generator, then back to me. "This is a restricted zone." "Wow," I said, letting the sarcasm sharpen into a blade. "I had no idea. Next you'll tell me the air quality is bad." A pause. Not offended. Not amused either. Just patient. "You're an Omega," he said, like an observation, not a claim. I smiled without warmth. "Congratulations. Want a sticker?" His nostrils flared once, subtle. Like he was cataloging my scent the way I cataloged exits. He didn't step closer. Didn't bare teeth. Didn't throw his dominance at me like a net. He simply stood there, and the silence did the work for him. My skin tightened anyway. Not submission, my body didn't know him well enough to kneel, but the old reflex that said, "Alpha near, be careful." I hated that reflex. Hated my biology like it was a traitor living under my ribs. "What do you want?" I asked. His eyes didn't move from mine. To clear this sector. Then clear it, I said. I'm not a rebel. You're not City Pack either. I shrugged, forcing my shoulders loose. I'm not a lot of things. The red lights blinked. His face went briefly dark, then bright again. In that flicker, I saw it. Something behind the soldier's stillness. Not softness. Not mercy. Control. The kind that could become violence if he chose. But he didn't choose it. You shouldn't be here, he said, quieter now. Not an order. Not a threat. A statement that sounded almost personal. My mouth went dry. Annoying. I licked my lips. Glaring like that could hide the small betrayal of my body. And yet, I said, stepping backward toward the alley mouth, here I am. He didn't move. No lunge. No command. That was the strangest part. So what? I called, letting my grin turn sharp. You going to arrest me, drag me out by the collar, mark me with your heroic alpha teeth? For the first time something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Something closer to interest. Like I'd thrown him a puzzle piece he didn't expect. No, he said simply. The word landed heavy. No games. No performance. Just no. My pulse stumbled. Fine. If he wasn't going to chase, I'd make it easy for him to regret it. I turned and ran. Boots hitting broken pavement, lungs burning cold, the alley swallowing me whole. I didn't look back until I was 3 turns deep, my headlamp off, pressed behind a collapsed fence with rust in my mouth. I listened. No pursuit. No snapping jaws. No shouted command. Only my own breath, fast, furious, and the distant steady hum of the generator catching like a heartbeat. In the darkness, my hand drifted to my chest, as if it could hold my ribs together. I told myself I was laughing because I'd gotten away. But the truth was meaner. I was laughing because for the first time since my pack left me to die, an alpha had looked at me like I was a person. And not a resource. And that scared me more than the quarantine zone ever had. By the time I reached my workshop, my legs were shaking from more than the run. The space was carved out of what used to be a delivery tunnel, narrow, crooked, smelling of oil, damp concrete and old heat. Wires crawled along the walls like metal veins. Tools hung from hooks, scavenged off 3 different buildings, none of them matching, all of them earned. Home. In the loosest sense of the word. I slammed the door shut behind me and dropped the lock bar into place. Then I waited. 10 seconds. 20. I held my breath, listening for the telltale signs, boots, voices, the subtle pressure of an alpha pushing dominance through walls like smoke. Nothing. My shoulders slowly lowered. My pulse didn't. He didn't follow. That realization hit wrong. Too quiet. Too clean. Most alphas chased. They always did. Out of pride, control, or the sheer insult of being refused by an omega who didn't know his place. I'd built my survival around that certainty. Run fast, turn sharp, disappear. But Mark Hale had let me go like I was a decision, not a problem. It made my skin itch. You look like hell, Mina said. I flinched and then scowled. Nice to see you too. She leaned in the doorway to the back room, arms crossed, dark hair pulled into a knot that meant she'd been working all night. There was grease on her cheek and dried blood on her sleeve. Someone else's, I hoped. Mina had the sharp, angular build of a beta, who'd learned early that softness didn't keep you alive. She eyed me from boots to collarbone. You run from a pack raid or a bad date? Both, I muttered, shrugging out of my jacket. She snorted, but her gaze sharpened. You smell like alpha. I froze. Lucky me, I said lightly, turning toward the workbench so she wouldn't see my jaw tighten. City Pack sniffing around. I didn't roll over and present my throat, shockingly. Mina walked closer, her steps soft but deliberate. She didn't crowd me. She never did. Instead, she nudged a cracked stool toward me with her foot. Sit, she said. Not a command. A habit. I sat. He didn't touch you? She asked. No. Didn't mark you? No. Didn't chase? I hesitated half a second too long. Mina's brow furrowed. That's not good. That's what I said, I snapped, irritation flaring hotter than it should have. Alphas don't just stop. They do when they're confident, she said. Or when they're patient. I hated how that landed. Hated the strange, unwelcome spark that followed, the flicker of interest I refused to name. Mark Hale, Mina continued, turning to the small radio perched on a shelf. She twisted the dial, static crackling before settling into a low, urgent voice. City announcement went out 20 minutes ago. Sector sweeps start tonight. Full clear. My stomach dropped. The voice on the radio droned on about safety and order and necessary force. Words that sounded clean until you remembered what they left behind. Mina looked at me, eyes sharp, unsoftened. You need to move. I shook my head. I won't run just because an alpha walked into my night. She sighed, scrubbing a hand down her face. Rian. I don't believe in good alphas, never have, but I believe in dangerous ones. And that man? She paused. He didn't chase you, because he didn't have to. Silence stretched between us, thick with oil and truth. I stared at my hands. Steady, calloused, mine. Good, I said finally, forcing a crooked smile. Let him think that. But long after Mina turned back to her work, my thoughts stayed on the alley, the red lights, and an alpha who'd looked at me like I was worth remembering. Suspicion curled tight in my chest. And beneath it, annoyingly, stubbornly, something that felt a lot like interest, wearing irritation like a disguise. Daylight changed everything. The market street cut through the edge of the quarantine zone like a stubborn scar that refused to close. Vendors had dragged in crates, strung up patched tarps, painted over bullet holes with bright colors that lied just enough to keep people moving. The air smelled like fried dough, engine oil, and too many bodies pretending this was normal. I moved through the crowd with a bag of spare parts slung over my shoulder, head down, senses sharp. Day made people sloppy. Night taught you respect. That's when the noise bent around him. Not silence. Something subtler. Space. Like the crowd unconsciously made room before they knew why. I felt it before I saw him. Mark Hale stood near a fruit stall, sunlight catching in his dark hair, uniform. Jacket unbuttoned like he wasn't trying to remind anyone who he was. No weapons visible. No pack at his back. Just him, hands relaxed at his sides, gaze steady as he watched the street. Waiting. I considered turning around, slipping into an alley, pretending I hadn't noticed. Instead, my feet kept going. Should I start charging rent? I asked as I stopped a few steps away. You're in my neighborhood an awful lot. His eyes met mine, sharp and unreadable. Up close, he looked less like a war story and more like a man who carried too many of them. Good morning, he said. That was it. No title, no warning. Wow, I replied. Polite and early. The city pack must be evolving. The corner of his mouth twitched, barely. You ran well last night. I bristled. You say that like it was a test. I say it like an observation. We stood there, the market flowing around us like water around stone. I was acutely aware of everything. His scent muted but present, the way my omega instincts curled tight instead of folding, the strange absence of pressure. He wasn't pushing dominance. That alone put me on edge. What do you want, Mark Hale? I asked, keeping my voice even. If this is where you tell me to leave the zone, save it. I've heard the speech. I'm not here to give you a speech. Then what? To see if you'd talk to me in the daylight. The honesty threw me. I hated that more than lies. I snorted. Congratulations. You've confirmed I'm still sarcastic before noon. His gaze flicked briefly to the bag on my shoulder. You fix things. Yes. For people who don't belong to my pack. Yes. And you don't ask for protection. I shifted my weight, annoyed by how closely he was tracking me. No one gives it for free. Some do. I laughed, sharp and short. And some sign quarantine orders and call it mercy. His expression didn't change, but something cooled behind his eyes, like a shutter sliding into place. You don't trust alphas, he said. I don't trust systems, I shot back. Alphas just happen to run most of them. A beat passed. The smell of citrus from the fruit stall cut through the tension. I won't force you to leave, Mark said. And I won't pretend this area is safe. Wow, I said. You're full of comfort today. His eyes held mine. I'm full of facts. That should have been the end of it. A warning delivered. Lines drawn. Instead, he stepped back. Just one step, but it felt like he'd broken some invisible rule. I won't chase you, he said quietly. But I won't pretend I didn't notice you either. Then he turned. And walked away. The crowd swallowed him whole. Just another tall man in a jacket disappearing into daylight. I stood there longer than I meant to, heart thudding, mind racing. Alphas didn't do that. They claimed. They cornered. They took. Mark Hale had done none of it. For the first time since the quarantine zone became my whole world, I found myself wondering, not what he wanted from me, but why he'd left it up to me to decide. The streets didn't care about packs. They cared about who showed up, who fixed what was broken, and who didn't disappear when things went bad. By midday, my hands were black with grease and my patience was wearing thin. I was wedged under the hood of a battered transport in one of the beta garages, a long, low space carved into an old parking structure. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling, striping the concrete in pale gold. The place smelled like fuel, sweat, and burnt insulation. "Rian," a voice called, already strained with hope. "Please tell me you can make it run." I slid out from under the transport and wiped my hands on a rag that had once been white. The driver, a beta with tired eyes and a shaking knee, watched me like I was deciding his fate. "It'll run," I said. "It won't be pretty." Relief broke across his face. He laughed, shaky and loud. "I don't need pretty. I need it to move." "That makes two of us," I muttered. I worked fast. No theatrics. No promises I couldn't keep. When the engine finally coughed back to life, the sound echoed through the garage like a small miracle. The beta pressed a handful of credits into my palm and then hesitated, adding a protein bar on top like an offering. I didn't refuse. Out on the street, the day rolled on. I fixed a cracked power relay for a shop that sold knockoff boots. I rewired a clinic's backup generator while a doctor stitched someone up behind a hanging sheet. I patched a hole in a rooftop water line and pretended not to notice. The way people watched me. Careful, grateful, afraid to ask for more. This was my pack. Not bonded by scent or hierarchy, but by need and memory. In the underground clinic, Mina tossed me a bottle of antiseptic and jerked her chin toward a narrow cot. "Sit. You're bleeding." I looked down and finally noticed the slice along my forearm. "It's nothing. Everything's nothing until it gets infected," she snapped, already cleaning it. A kid lay 2 beds down, ribs wrapped tight, eyes too old for his face. He watched me with quiet intensity. "Is it true?" he asked. "You told the Alpha to get lost." Mina snorted. "He did more than that." I rolled my eyes. "Don't start legends. I just didn't kneel." The kid smiled like that mattered. Outside, the mood shifted as the afternoon dragged on. Whispers traveled faster than power in this part of the city. Names passed between mouths. Warnings folded into jokes. Buntovshiki, rebels, failed alphas, broken omegas. People who'd been chewed up by packs and decided the whole system deserved to burn. "They're organizing," a garage owner told me quietly as I handed back his tools. "Hitting supply lines. Taking territory." "Territory for what?" I asked. He shrugged. "For not being owned." The word stuck. Freedom sounded clean when you said it like that. It always did. But I'd learned the cost of it early. No backup, no safety net, no one coming when you screamed. I walked home through alleys that knew my steps, my shoulders loose, my spine straight. No one told me where to go. No one told me when to leave. That was the upside. The downside was written in every scar, every locked door, every night I slept light because no one else was on watch. As I reached my workshop, the hum of the generator steady and familiar, Mark Hale crossed my mind again, uninvited, unwelcome. He offered structure, safety, a system. I had something better. I had choice. And if the streets taught me anything, it was this. Freedom kept you alive. But it never kept you comfortable. The ambush started with glass. One second I was halfway up the stairwell of a half-collapsed office building, there for a simple job rerouting a power node the clinic depended on, and the next the window above me exploded inward, shards screaming through the air like metal birds. I hit the ground hard. Breath knocked clean out of my lungs. Gunfire followed. Short bursts. Controlled. Not random. Down. Someone shouted. Too late. I was already flat, heart slamming so hard it made my vision stutter. The smell hit me next. Burnt powder, hot concrete, blood fresh enough to sting the back of my throat. Rebels. They poured in through the broken windows and the blown side door, moving fast, reckless, fueled by anger more than training. I crawled behind a chunk of fallen wall, fingers scrabbling for my knife, my pulse roaring in my ears. Then the air changed. Pressure rolled through the stairwell like a wave, heavy, anchoring, terrifyingly calm. Alpha. I looked up just in time to see Mark Hale drop from the landing above, landing clean despite the chaos. He didn't shout orders. didn't bare his teeth or flood the space with dominance. He moved. A rebel lunged at me from the left. I twisted. A gunshot cracked. The body hit the wall inches from my face. Mark didn't look at me. His eyes were already tracking the next threat. "Can you move?" he asked, voice steady as a metronome. "Yes," I snapped, scrambling to my feet. "Try not to make this a habit." Noted. We didn't argue. There was no time for it. The building groaned under the impact of gunfire and collapsing beams, dust choking the air. My lungs burned. My hands shook, not with fear but with adrenaline sharp enough to taste. We moved without discussion. I ducked low, darting between cover points, instincts screaming roots and risks. Mark mirrored me without crowding, without overruling. When I veered right, he covered left. When I paused, he paused. It was infuriating. It was perfect. A rebel rushed him from behind, blade flashing. I reacted without thinking, lunged, slashed, felt resistance and heat as the knife connected. The rebel went down with a strangled cry. Mark glanced at me then. Just a flicker. Acknowledgement. Something tight in my chest loosened, and immediately tightened again when a second wave crashed through the stairwell. "Back," he said, already moving. We ended up in a narrow office space with half the wall missing. The city yawning below us in a mess of smoke and sirens. No cover. No clean exit. My omega instincts flared, skin prickling, scent glands aching like they wanted to betray me. I forced it down with a snarl. "Not now." Mark stepped closer, not into my space, but into my line. A shield without a cage. A shot rang out. Pain ripped across my shoulder, white and vicious. I bit back a sound, teeth clicking hard enough to hurt. Mark moved instantly. He turned, putting his body between me and the window, one arm braced, the other firing with brutal precision. Another rebel fell. Then another. I stared at his back, chest heaving, the realization slamming into me harder than the bullet had. He hadn't thought about it. He'd covered me on instinct. "Rian," he said, low and urgent. "Can you still fight?" I flexed my arm. Pain screamed. I grinned anyway. "Unfortunately." His breath huffed out, half laugh, half relief. We stood back to back then, shoulders brushing, heat radiating through layers of fabric and adrenaline. The contact sent a jolt straight down my spine. Not submission. Not arousal. Recognition. We moved as one unit, turning, firing, striking, retreating by inches. My world narrowed to sound and motion and the steady presence at my back that told me exactly where not to worry. When the last rebel fled, boots pounding down the stairwell, curses echoing, the silence felt unreal. My knees finally threatened to give. I leaned into Mark before I could stop myself. He caught me. Firm. Controlled. No possessive grip. Just support. For a second, neither of us spoke. Dust floated in the broken sunlight. My heartbeat slowed from a war drum to something almost human. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded, swallowing hard. "You?" "Yes." I pulled away first, because of course I did. "Don't get used to this," I said, forcing sarcasm back into my voice like armor. "I don't make a habit of trusting alphas." Mark met my gaze, something unreadable passing through his eyes. "I don't make a habit of earning it," he replied. That was the problem. He already had. The pack's temporary headquarters used to be a logistics hub, concrete walls, reinforced doors, a ceiling too high for comfort. Someone had scrubbed the bloodstains but missed the feeling they left behind. The air was orderly, efficient, and wrong for me in ways I couldn't quite name. I stood near the entrance, arms crossed, trying not to look like I was calculating exits. I was calculating exits. Mark Hale spoke with his people in low voices a few meters away. No shouting. No posturing. They listened because he made sense, not because he loomed. When he finally turned to me, the room seemed to tilt toward him like it had decided where gravity lived. "You should get that shoulder checked," he said. "I already did," I replied. "It still hurts." Miracles are rare. A corner of his mouth lifted. Then he gestured toward a quiet side room, not a command, just an invitation. We stepped inside. The door closed softly. "I'm not here to recruit you," Mark said, "or to move you." I waited. My pulse kept a stubborn tempo. "There will be more raids," he continued. "The rebels won't stop after tonight. If you stay in the open, you'll be a target." "I'm always a target," I said. "Comes with the zip code." He nodded once, as if that mattered. "I can offer protection." Temporary, no bond, no mark. You keep your work, you keep your space. My chest tightened. Annoying. How reasonable that sounded. I searched his face for the catch, the quiet claim, the hidden leash. There was none. Just a calm certainty, like he'd already accepted whatever answer I gave. Why? I asked. Because you don't belong to the rebels, he said. And because you saved lives today. You're an alpha, I shot back. Protection always costs something. Not this time. That was the line that broke me. Not because it was false, because it might be true. I pictured the streets. The clinic's generator. Mina's tired eyes. The way my shoulder throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I wanted safety like a hunger. I wanted sleep without listening for boots. I wanted... No, I said. The word tasted like metal. Mark didn't flinch. Didn't lean in. Didn't try to renegotiate the air between us. Understood, he said. Just like that. I stared, thrown off balance. You're not going to argue. I offered, he replied. You declined. Silence settled. Thick, but not hostile. I hated how much I respected it. This isn't personal, I added, because my mouth had a habit of filling quiet with defenses. I don't do packs. I know, he said. And I don't owe you anything for tonight. I know. My hands curled into fists. The desire to say thank you scraped against my ribs, sharp and unwelcome. If you change your mind, Mark said, opening the door, you know where to find me. He paused, just long enough to meet my eyes. I won't come looking. Then he left. I stood there alone, the hum of the headquarters seeping back in, and pressed my palm to my chest like I could keep my heart from being stupid. Wanting safety didn't mean I was ready to surrender. Desire wasn't consent. And if I learned anything from being left behind once, it was this. Choosing myself would always cost something. I didn't plan on finding the rebels. They found me. The entrance to their hideout was a rusted maintenance hatch, half hidden behind a collapsed bus, the kind of place you only noticed if you were already looking for ways out. The underground passage beyond it smelled damp and sour, layered with old smoke and newer fear. Power cables snaked along the walls, sparking weak light over graffiti that screamed slogans about freedom and fire. I followed because walking away felt like lying to myself. The rebels weren't what the city broadcasts painted them as. No frothing lunatics. No constant howling. Just people, too thin, too tense, eyes sharp with the kind of anger that never slept. They knew me. You're the mechanic, a woman said as I passed. She was an Omega. Scent frayed and bitter, shoulders squared like she'd learned the hard way that softness invited pain. The one who doesn't kneel. I didn't correct her. They told their stories without ceremony, like they were reading from a shared script. An Omega who'd been assigned to a pack unit as morale support until he stopped being useful. Another who'd been left behind during a relocation because she was injured and slowed them down. A third, barely more than a kid, whose heat suppressant ration had been miscalculated during a supply shortage. Accidents, someone said with a hollow laugh. That's what they call it. I listened until my jaw ached from clenching. The system wasn't broken. It was efficient. Packs didn't have to be cruel to be deadly. They just had to prioritize. Omegas were assets until they weren't. After that, we became numbers. Liabilities, acceptable losses. Alphas sign the orders, a rebel beta said, leaning against the tunnel wall. Doesn't matter if they cry about it later. My chest tightened. Mark Hale's face rose unbidden in my mind, calm, controlled, steady, the way he'd said I won't chase you. The way he'd stepped between me and the gunfire without hesitation. I hated how hard it was to fit him into this picture. You think he's different? The Omega woman said quietly, watching me too closely. I bristled. I didn't say that. You don't have to, she replied. Hope smells a lot like denial. That one hit deep. I left the hideout through a different tunnel, the underground swallowing me in damp darkness. My footsteps echoed, each one a reminder of how easily paths close behind you down here. Fear crept in, not sharp, but cold and persistent. I'd been left once. Marked expendable. Promised rewards that never came. What scared me wasn't that Mark might be lying. It was that he might be telling the truth, and still be part of the machine that decided who got left behind next. The city above hummed faintly through the concrete, distant and indifferent. I pressed my hand to my chest, grounding myself in the steady thump of my heart. I didn't want to believe in good alphas. I wanted to believe in choices. But systems had a way of turning people into functions, no matter how careful they thought they were. As I climbed back toward the surface, one thought lodged itself behind my ribs, heavy and insistent. If Mark Hale ever had to choose between his pack and me, I already knew how packs made those decisions. And I wasn't sure I'd survive being right again. I told myself I was only there for parts. The archive wing sat beneath what used to be a municipal planning office. Concrete, steel, and old systems no one bothered to fully dismantle. The city kept its ghosts in places like this. Outdated servers, backup drives, forgotten authorizations that still carried legal weight if you knew how to wake them up. I knew how. The terminal hummed softly as it powered on, the screen flickering from black to a washed-out blue. Dust coated the desk in a thin, even layer, disturbed only by my fingerprints. The air smelled dead, cold metal, stale electricity, nothing organic enough to register. That should have been my first warning. I bypassed the surface permissions easily. Whoever had designed the system had believed in walls more than locks. My fingers moved on muscle memory, pulling up archived quarantine directives tied to my old sector. Just to confirm dates, I told myself. Context. Information never hurt anyone. That was the lie. The file loaded slowly, lines of text scrolling past like a verdict being read by a machine that didn't care if anyone listened. Quarantine resolution, Sector 14B. Status, active, archived. Unit classification, expendable. My breath stuttered. I scrolled faster. Operational notes. Risk assessments. Cold, clean language that stripped lives down to percentages and acceptable loss margins. I recognized the phrasing. Pack military doctrine. Efficient. Precise. Familiar. My fingers hesitated when I reached the authorization block. I already knew what I was going to see. I scrolled anyway. Authorized by Commander Mark Hale. The world went quiet. Not silence, absence. The hum of the server vanished. The distant drip of water somewhere in the concrete maze disappeared. Even my own breathing faded into something far away, like it belonged to someone else. Cold flooded my chest, spreading outward in a slow, deliberate wave. My hands went numb. I pressed my thumb against the desk, hard enough to hurt, just to feel something. Nothing. My senses, my omega senses, collapsed inward. Sense dulled, then vanished completely, like someone had slammed a door inside my head. No oil, no dust, no trace of the city above. Just emptiness. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Expendable. That's what we'd been. Not trapped, not unlucky, not overwhelmed. Written off. My pack leader's voice echoed in my memory. You'll be rewarded. I promise. I laughed, and the sound came out wrong, thin and cracked. It echoed in the archive room like a bad joke no one wanted to hear. Mark Hale hadn't pulled the trigger. He'd signed the paper that said the trigger didn't matter. I thought of the way he'd stood in front of me during the firefight. The way he'd offered protection without pressure. The way he'd accepted my refusal like it was a right, not a challenge. None of it erased this. There was no dramatic explanation attached to the order. No justification in the margins. Just a digital signature and a timestamp that burned itself into my vision. I closed my eyes. The emptiness stayed. This was worse than betrayal shouted in anger. Worse than lies wrapped in affection. This was a choice made calmly. Professionally. With full awareness of the cost. I understood systems. I lived by street rules. I knew someone always paid. But knowing didn't stop the hollow from spreading. When I finally pulled my hand away from the terminal, my fingers were trembling. Mark Hale hadn't been lying to me. That was the cruelest part. He'd been honest, and still signed us into the ground. Mark Hale's office was exactly what I expected. Spartan. Clean. Functional to the point of austerity. No trophies. No sentimental junk. A wide desk bolted to the floor, a wall display showing city sectors and threat levels, the muted hum of power running through everything like a held breath. Silence lived here. It pressed against my ears as I stepped inside, closing the door behind me with deliberate care. I didn't want drama. I didn't want witnesses. Mark stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, jacket folded neatly over a chair. He turned the moment he scented me. His eyes sharpened, but he didn't look surprised. You shouldn't be here, he said. I laughed softly. It scraped my throat raw. You're going to hate this, then. I crossed the room and tossed the data chip onto his desk. It skidded to a stop between us, small and devastating. Explain, I said. He didn't touch it. His gaze dropped to the chip, then lifted back to my face. Something in his expression shifted, not guilt, not fear. Recognition. How did you get this? He asked. That's not the question. The silence stretched. Thick. Heavy. Honest in a way lies never were. Finally, Mark exhaled. Slow. Controlled. I signed it, he said. No denial. No softening of the words. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk, nails biting into wood. You don't want to tell me why? I can, he replied, but it won't make it better. My chest burned. Try. He stepped away from the window, stopping a few feet from me, close enough that I could feel his presence, far enough that he wasn't crowding. Sector 14B was collapsing, he said. Supply lines were cut. Reinforcements were days out. Command needed time to evacuate 3 adjacent districts with higher civilian density. I swallowed hard. Your pack was already inside the quarantine perimeter, he continued. Mobile. Armed. Familiar with the terrain. I shook my head, a sharp, broken motion. So, you fed us to the fire. Yes. The word landed like a gunshot. My vision blurred at the edges. I forced myself to keep looking at him, to not look away like my pack had. Did you know? I asked quietly. Did you know they'd leave Omegas behind? Mark didn't hesitate. Yes. The honesty hurt worse than any lie could have. I gave the order knowing some of them wouldn't make it, he said. I gave it knowing it would be called necessary. My voice came out hoarse. And do you still call it that? A long pause. No. Something in his control cracked then, not outward, not dramatic, but inward, like a fracture you only felt under pressure. I live with it, he said. Every day. I don't pretend it was clean. I don't pretend it didn't destroy people who trusted the system to protect them. My hands shook. Anger surged, hot and sharp, but beneath it was something worse. Understanding. That terrified me. You stood in front of me, I said. You let me think. I never said I was innocent, he cut in gently. I said I wouldn't lie to you. Tears burned behind my eyes. I hated them. Hated the weakness of it. You don't get to be better now, I whispered. Not to me. I know. There it was again. Acceptance. No defense. No plea for absolution. It should have satisfied me. Instead, it hollowed me out. I straightened, forcing distance between us. I came here so you'd look at me when I walked away. His jaw tightened. Just once. Rian. No, I said. Don't follow. Don't offer. Don't protect. I moved toward the door, every step heavy with the weight of things unsaid. At the threshold, I paused. For what it's worth, I added, not turning back. You didn't betray me by lying. He said nothing. You betrayed me by being exactly who you are. The door closed behind me with a soft, final click. In the hallway my legs nearly gave out. I pressed my shoulder to the cold wall, breath shuddering out of me in short, broken pulls. It hurt. God, it hurt. But as the pain settled, something else remained. Unwanted. Undeniable. Respect. And that was almost worse. The rebels met in what used to be a transit hub. Deep underground where the city's heartbeat faded into a dull echo. Floodlights cast harsh shadows over cracked tile and rusted rails. The air buzzed with tension. Anger sharpened into something almost electric. I stood near the edge of the gathering, arms folded tight, listening. They weren't whispering anymore. We hit the central node, a beta with scarred knuckles said, stabbing a finger at a projected map. Take out power to the pack districts. Let them feel what quarantine really means. And when civilians get caught in the dark? Someone asked. The beta shrugged. Collateral. The word made my stomach twist. An Omega across the room, young, eyes bright with fury, spoke up. We don't stop until the packs fall. Alphas, betas, omegas, it's all rotten. Burn it down and start over. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I thought of the clinic's generator. Of the kid with 2 old eyes. Of Mina counting antiseptic like it was currency. This isn't freedom, I said, louder than I meant to. Heads turned. The scarred beta sneered. You got a better idea, mechanic? I swallowed, pulse pounding. You're not fighting the system. You're becoming it. Anger flared, fast and dangerous. You think packs care who gets crushed? The Omega shot back. They didn't care about us. I know, I said. I lived it. Silence fell, brittle and sharp. They left us behind, someone muttered. Why shouldn't we return the favor? Because I'd seen where that road ended. Images rose unbidden, Mark's signature on the order. His body in front of mine during the firefight. The calm acceptance when I'd told him no. Hatred made choices simple. It drew clean lines. Us and them. Burn and be done. But simple didn't mean right. I won't help you hurt people who never signed those orders, I said slowly. If that's the plan, I'm out. A few faces shifted, uncertain. Others hardened. The scarred beta laughed. Figures. You get close to an alpha, and suddenly you grow a conscience. The accusation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. I didn't choose him, I said. I chose not to become this. I turned and walked away before they could answer, before doubt could creep back in and make me hesitate. The tunnel swallowed me, footsteps echoing against damp stone. With every step the anger drained, leaving something heavier in its place. Choice. Not between pack and rebellion. Between repeating the cycle and breaking it. I stopped halfway to the surface, pressing my palm to the wall, grounding myself in the cold grit of reality. I could walk away from both sides. Disappear. Survive. That had always been my strength. But survival without direction was just another kind of exile. When I finally climbed back into the night air, the city above roared on, indifferent and alive. I lifted my head. Burning the system wasn't the same as building something better. And for the first time I knew what I was going to fight for. The city didn't ease into chaos. It detonated. Sirens screamed from every direction, overlapping into a single endless wail. The sky pulsed orange, where something large burned, too large to be an accident. Power flickered, surged, then died block by block, plunging streets into strobing darkness lit by fire and emergency flares. I stood on a rooftop 2 sectors away, radio clenched in my fist, listening to voices fracture into panic. Civilians trapped. Orders are to hold the perimeter. Rebels breached the lower. Mark's voice cut through it all. Calm. Controlled. Furious in a way he never let show. Evacuate the east corridor, all units. A pause. Static. Then another voice, higher command. Negative. Priority is containment. Do not break formation. I closed my eyes. There it was. The moment where systems made their choices. I could still walk away. Melt into the alleys. Protect my people, my streets, my narrow slice of the city. Let packs and rebels tear each other apart like they always did. Instead, I ran. The streets were a blur of smoke and bodies. A transport lay on its side, flames licking up the metal like hungry tongues. I ducked under falling debris, lungs burning, instincts screaming roots and risks. I wasn't here for Mark. I was here because I refused to let the city decide who was expendable tonight. I reached the intersection just as the firefight peaked. Rebels surged from the underground, pack units holding a line they were clearly ordered not to cross. Between them, civilians, trapped, screaming. Mark stood at the front. I saw it in the way his shoulders squared, the way his stance shifted, not defensive but defiant. Fall back, he ordered his unit. We're clearing the street. A chorus of stunned protests answered him. Sir, command. I said, fall back. He stepped forward alone, dominance rolling out not to crush, but to anchor. Rebels hesitated. Civilians scattered. That was when command cut the channel. I didn't think. I vaulted a barricade, sliding in beside him like my body had always known where it belonged in that moment. Mark's head snapped toward me. For the first time since I'd known him, his composure cracked. You shouldn't be here, he said. I know, I replied, breathless. Move. We moved. Together. I rerouted a disabled barrier in seconds, sparks flying as power surged back long enough to open a path. Mark hauled a wounded woman over his shoulder without slowing, firing one-handed with lethal precision. Orders shouted over comms dissolved into noise. The system was screaming. Mark ignored it. More shots. More fire. A building collapsed down the street, sending a shockwave that rattled my bones. I stumbled, caught myself on Mark's arm. He didn't let go. Not once. We cleared the last civilians just as pack reinforcements finally broke formation to follow him. By then, it was already done. The line had shifted. The city had been saved despite itself. When the smoke thinned, Mark turned to me, eyes dark, searching. You came back, he said. I chose to, I answered. That was the difference. Sirens faded into the distance. Fires were contained. The rebels scattered, their momentum broken by something they hadn't planned. 4. An alpha who refused to obey, and an omega who refused to disappear. Command crackled back over the radio, cold and furious. Mark reached up and switched it off. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. I looked at the wreckage, the survivors clinging to each other, the city still standing. My chest ached, not with fear, not with hope, with certainty. I hadn't returned to forgive him. I hadn't returned to belong. I'd returned because this was the choice I could live with. And for the first time, standing in the middle of the ruin, I knew exactly who I was fighting for. Myself. The city was quieter after the fires burned down, not peaceful, just stunned. Like it needed time to understand it was still alive. We stood on the edge of a cleared street, as medics moved between the wounded, their boots crunching softly over broken glass. Dawn crept in slow and gray, washing the smoke from the sky. My clothes were stiff with dried blood, some mine, most not. My shoulder throbbed in a deep, dull rhythm that promised consequences later. Mark watched the cleanup in silence. Not like a victor, like someone counting the cost. You defied command, I said finally. Yes. No justification, no pride. They won't forget that. I know. I studied him from the side, the tension held too carefully in his posture. The exhaustion he wouldn't allow to show. This was the alpha they followed. Not because he was flawless, because he chose. He turned to face me fully then. You should stay. There it was. Simple. Unembellished. With the pack? I asked. With the city, he corrected. With us? I exhaled slowly. The word us scraped against old scars. I'm not kneeling, I said. I wouldn't ask you to. That's not what I mean. I met his eyes, forcing the truth into the open where it couldn't rot. No bonds, no hierarchy. I don't answer to alphas. I don't get reassigned. I don't become a symbol you can point at when command asks questions. He listened. Actually listened. No impatience. No interruption. I work, I continued. I fix things. I help people. I walk away if I decide this stops being right. And if you ever sign another order like that one, my voice tightened. I'm gone. Silence stretched between us, fragile and deliberate. You wouldn't belong to the pack, Mark said slowly. Not by law, not by claim. Good. You'd be protected, he added. But not owned. I snorted quietly. Careful. You're starting to sound like a fantasy. A faint smile ghosted across his mouth. I'm aware of my limitations. He extended his hand, not palm up, not demanding. Just there. I accept your terms, he said. Something in my chest loosened, not relief. Recognition. I didn't take his hand right away. I let the moment breathe. Let the weight of it settle. Then I clasped his wrist instead, firm, equal. No kneeling, I repeated. Never, he said. We released each other, the agreement hanging between us. Unromantic, unpretty, solid as steel. This wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a choice made with open eyes. And for the first time, standing in the fragile calm after violence, I felt something dangerously close to balance. Morning in the city smelled different. Cleaner, somehow. Like smoke had finally decided to lift its weight off the streets and let people breathe again. Sunlight crept through the cracked windows of my workshop, catching on hanging. Tools and coils of wire, turning metal into something almost warm. I tightened the last bolt on the generator and leaned back, stretching until my spine popped. Tell me that's the good sound, Mina said from the doorway, coffee in hand, eyebrow raised. The generator hummed, steady, strong, alive. That's the sound of things not exploding, I said. My personal favorite. She snorted and tossed me the coffee. You've got pack runners outside, trying very hard to pretend they're not guarding you. I took a sip and winced. Is it poison? Cheap, she corrected. Different category. I followed her gaze toward the open street. 2 pack members stood across the way, conspicuously unconspicuous, arguing quietly about whose turn it was to bring supplies. Not watching me. Definitely watching me. Don't get used to it, I muttered. Mina smirked. Oh, I won't. But I will enjoy it. She left me to my work, boots echoing down the corridor. The city moved around me, vendors opening stalls, kids darting through alleys, engines coughing to life. Normality, patched together like everything else. Mark didn't come to the workshop every day. That mattered. When he did, he didn't take up space like he owned it. He leaned against doorframes, asked questions, listened to answers. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes he brought silence and let me decide what to do with it. Today he showed up with a crate of parts and an expression that said he hadn't slept enough. "You're early," I said. "You're predictable," he replied. "The city likes that." I glanced at the crate. "These aren't cheap. They're necessary." "So am I," I said lightly. His eyes met mine, warm and unreadable. "Exactly. We didn't touch. Not right away. We didn't need to. The closeness was there anyway. In the shared air, in the way neither of us flinched. Later when he left, it wasn't with a promise. Just a nod. An understanding that we'd both keep choosing this until one of us didn't. I locked up the workshop as the sun climbed higher, metal warm beneath my palms. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was bracing for something to be taken away. This city wasn't gentle. This life wasn't safe. But it was mine. I stayed. Not because I believed in packs. Not because I trusted systems. Not even because I loved him. Though that truth hovered close enough to make my chest ache. I stayed because I was finally somewhere that didn't ask me to disappear. I didn't stay because he was an alpha. I stayed because he never tried to own me.